Shadowverse has been running for 8 years, with around 100 new cards released every 3 months. It is not easy to make expansions of consistent high quality with this pace. Cygames has made mistakes over that time, but they also learned from them and have improved their card design. Today, we'll see 6 game design lessons we can learn from Shadowverse. If you've played the game casually or even aimed for the highest ranks on ladder, you might gain a new perspective on your favorite card game. And if you've never played Shadowverse and are looking for insights on game design for card games, I'll make sure to give you enough context so that you get the points I'll be going through. Keep in mind we won't talk about the gacha aspects of Shadowverse like rewards, monetization, and retention, but purely about the card game itself. So without further ado, let's begin. Games are made with a precise audience in mind. The standard player that Cygames was targeting with Shadowverse is Tanaka-san. Tanaka-san is a salaryman in his 20s that goes to work every day. While commuting in the subway or in the train, in the morning and in the evening, Tanaka-san has 10 to 20 minutes to log in and play a game. Even if the game was ported on Steam later on and affected a different audience, one that stays at home and has a lot of time to play, Shadowverse was originally thought to be a mobile game, so the length of a game was a crucial factor. In 2017, the Control Blood deck based around Belphegor ran tons of removals and healing, and games against it could last for 15 turns, so around 30 minutes. This is not okay for Tanaka-san, who would not have the time to finish his match before going to work and would have to concede. If things stayed the same, Tanaka-san would have to move to another game and stop logging in daily. Thus, the designers made sure that the average game lasts for 7 turns across all metas, with strong finishers in most rotation decks. Demon Lord Iktar, Dark Dragoon Forte, Grimnir, all of those cards could turn a mid-game lead into a win. As an extra security against control decks, a lot of strong neutral cards with a very powerful effect on turn 10 were printed, and every time one of them rotated out, it would be replaced by a card with a similar role. Gilnalee's Omen of Craving made both players draw 5 cards, giving both players the resources to finish their opponent. Zelgania, the World, would deal 4 damage to every card and leader, either finishing the game or preventing any board from sticking. Gilnalee's Ravenous Craving made the opponent discard their whole hand, guaranteeing a kill on the next turn. Even Elena, released in the very last Shadowverse set, deals 10 damage if she evolves on turn 10, which represents half of the opponent's life points. All these cards, plus the ones that can only be played in a specific class, existed to easily end a game that is dragging on. This is a common problem in card games where cards have varied costs to play them. A cheap card can be played early in the game, but will be a bad top deck in the late game, and an expensive card will be unplayable in the early game and brick your hand. Cygames decided to commit to solving this issue, so that lots of cards can feel good to draw at any point in the game. Cheap followers get Enhance, giving them an extra effect if played for a higher cost. Bigger followers usually have an Accelerate effect, turning them into spells, or a Crystallize effect, turning them into amulets. Thus, around 600 cards out of 4,000 got one of these keywords, even among the low rarity cards that are supposed to be weaker. Even the fact that a legendary lacked a good Accelerate or Enhance effect became a way to balance them. The fact you are forced to play a follower for its Enhance cost if you can also leads to interesting problems that the player needs to solve by ordering their cards right. The drawback of this method is that it adds more text, so it requires more attention from the player to read the full card and understand which mode of the card they want to use. If you are enjoying the video so far, please take a second to leave a like. It really helps the video reach new people. Thanks. In Shadowverse, the player that goes first gets 2 evolution points on turn 5, allowing them to boost their followers and sometimes get extra effects, while the player that goes second gets 3 evolution points that they can use from turn 4. But despite that, in the first year of the game, the player going first had a 60% win rate, no matter which deck they were playing, to the point some players even referred to the game as First Verse. There were 2 main reasons for this. First, because there were not many effective healing tools or removals, the first followers the player going first played usually helped them build a huge lead. Second, since the design decision was to have powerful finishers on turn 7, so that Tanaka-san has time to finish his game. It meant the first player that reaches 7 play points can play their finisher before the opponent has a chance to. So in an effort to balance the chances for both players, Cygames tried a lot of things. In August 2016, they changed the rule so that the player going second draws 2 cards instead of 1 on their first turn. From the Chronogenesis expansion and onwards, they printed 4-cost followers with powerful evolve effects, such as Frontline Cavalier or Matera, Peerless Shot, that would be very convenient to use when going second and awkward going first. In 2020, with Storm over Reveal, they went even further and released Ramiel. It's a neutral follower that you can play in every deck with a convenient stat line. And if you go second and evolve her on turn 4, when you have 2 evolution points left and your opponent still has 0, then you can ramp. This completely changed the dynamic of the game, as now if the player going second gets their Ramiel on time, they would be the one having the initiative on playing their high-cost cards. Every deck that did not focus on a specific synergy was running Ramiel, and some matchups between combo decks went from being heavily first favored to heavily second favored because of her. Later on, more and more cards that have this "if you have more evolution points than your opponent" condition appeared, most of the time giving back play points when you played them. This is a clever formulation, because if you manage to hold on to your evolution points past turn 5 while forcing your opponent to use theirs, or if you had cards that let you recover evolution points such as Olivia and Sylvia, you could end up having more evolution points than your opponent even if you went first later in the game and profit from these extra effects, adding a layer of strategy. Making sure the players feel they have a fair chance at winning the game is crucial to keep them engaged. Even if most metas ended up giving a slight advantage to the player going first, these solutions created around the unique mechanic of Shadowverse still helped giving more justice to the loser of the coin flip. In Worlds Beyond, it seems like Cygames is looking to go even further with Super Evolve, unlocking a new effect if you use 2 evolution points, changing even more the playstyle of decks depending on if you went first or second. A Shadowverse deck contains exactly 40 cards. When you want to design a new archetype based around a specific synergy, you might be tempted to give the players as many tools as possible for this archetype to work and get played. However, giving the players too many toys can have the opposite effect. Here is a Machina Blood deck list from World Uprooted. Because there was so much support for it, and the deck required to play a lot of cards with the specific Machina trait, it had 3 negative effects. The optimal deck list was figured out on day 1. Everyone was running the same 40 cards for that deck, and nobody felt like they built that deck, that it was their idea. It was just given to them. This heavily limits the fun the player can have, and makes it feel very repetitive very fast. So what did Cygames do later on to fix that issue? Design uncomplete archetypes. Here is the core of the Loot Sword deck. Only 5 different cards, taking up to 15 deck slots. But because the core itself was strong, players still wanted to make the deck work, and they had to experiment a lot with the list to figure out what the last 25 cards were. The general idea became to put as many draws and followers centered around Rally, to profit from Storm-Racked First Mate's ability to summon a lot of followers in order to enable the other good staple cards in Swordcraft. Over the weeks, the deck list kept on changing, and you would rarely see 2 exact same loot deck list. When new cards were revealed, players were always debating on whether or not it could take the spot of another card in Loot Sword. Sometimes, less means more. Less cards, more possibilities. In card games, infinite loops are when a series of effects repeat forever. In a physical card game, you can call a judge and roll back the action so that the infinite doesn't happen, and maybe punish the player that is willingly causing it. But in a digital, automated card game, if a situation cannot be solved, it leads to a draw. Players can easily abuse this to get away from any game where they are in a losing position, and climb the ladder by having only wins and draws. This happened with Sentry Gate, a pretty bad bronze card, but that with a specific setup could trigger and destroy a follower that kept on reviving himself. Playing the follower would either make the game crash or get players stuck for minutes. A similar story happened with Temple of the Holy Lion. By having 5 copies of the temple on the board, thanks to Manifest Devotion, you could replay the Holy Lion crystal infinitely. And since the animation still happened during the opponent's turn, you ended up skipping their turn and disconnecting them for inactivity. While these are very niche interactions, it's extremely disgusting for the player on the receiving end. After that, Cygames became very cautious and applied a up to 5 or 10 times per turn clause on every card that could potentially create a similar situation. When designing a card game, you need to either make sure infinite loops are theoretically impossible, or that you have a fail-safe solution for this issue, like the one Shadowverse went for. A team of 10 to 100 beta testers cannot compare to a community of millions of players sharing information and winning deck lists through social media. You might be able to spot a few cards that were too powerful and change them before the release, but any that go through will be noticed by the players within 3 days. On the first days of an expansion, the decks that get to Grandmaster first are massively copied, and they can appear as an unbeatable, dominant strategy. In some cases, it's true, and a balance patch is needed as soon as possible. But in other cases, players adapt to the dominant deck, find a counter strategy, and the win rate of different decks balances out. As the developer, it's all about making the right call on which situation it is and applying the appropriate response. When Regal Wildcat was nerfed 3 days after the release of Fortune's Hand, some players complained that other better decks should have got hit. But when Adherent of Elimination, a 3 play point storm follower that could be abused in Spell Boost Rune, thanks to new support in Asphalt, started getting popular, everybody agreed they needed to get rid of this as soon as possible, and players complained every day until his nerf. As the years went on, after a lot of trial and error, it seems Cygames has made 3 decisions on its policy. Wait for at least a week after the release of an expansion, don't release a patch less than a week before an official tournament, and don't nerf cards from the mini expansions during their month of release. This way, they give just enough time for players to figure out if the meta finds an answer to an overpowered strategy or not, and they don't act too late when it could impact tournament players who would have to redo their preparation from scratch. So, what did we learn? When you design a card game, it's important to make sure the average time of a game is adapted to your target audience. Find ways to make cards useful at all stages of the game. Balance the chances between the players depending on who goes first. Not be afraid to design uncomplete archetypes. Look for ways to prevent design flaws, leading to scenarios like infinites, and to find the right timing for balance patches. And what about you? Which aspect of the card design did you enjoy in Shadowverse? Or what is something you think Cygames should or could improve in Worlds Beyond? Let me know in the comments section. Thank you for watching, and have a great day, everyone.